Celebrating 9 years of podcast excellence, the King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Wrestling is Real podcast, because wrestling needs us. Welcome to the Wrestling is Real podcast. We're in the middle of the lazy, hazy days of summer where there is a boatload of wrestling coming up now, leading up to Labor Day, where we get so much wrestling, it's just going to be awe-inducing and jaw-dropping. Thanks for joining me. I'm King of Podcasts. Thanks for being here for another edition. And here's what we got for you tonight. As the title gives, and look, I know everybody might be a little bit contentious about some of the titles we've been putting out for some of the episodes, but understanding my argument here, which I'm sure is much different than everybody else's out there, about the booking of WWE going forward. Now, this is what I got to say firsthand before I get into my whole diatribe tonight. Yes, I understand people being detested by the word sports entertainment. The Drew McIntyre Kevin Owens promo said a lot on Monday night. That's why I saw it all on my TikTok feed. Everybody was praising that. It went viral. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. The epitome of seeing two main event stars like Drew McIntyre and Kevin Owens getting the chance to be here and being recognized is one thing. But overall, they have to figure out how they're going to get themselves out of the booking of Roman Reigns as undisputed WWE Universal Champion and splitting those belts up. And they also have to go ahead and work around the booking of having the undisputed tag team titles on the Usos. So they have to work their booking of the bloodline around. How are they going to change it? Can they change it? They probably can't do anything about it now because, at least for Roman, The Rock is most likely going to be his opponent in Hollywood for WrestleMania next year. And what else are you going to do about it? WrestleMania 39, SoFi Stadium, they've already sold, 90,000 tickets all over 2 days? They have set a ticket sales record for WrestleMania. We're going to probably get The Rock and Roman Reigns. And they probably can't tarnish Roman Reigns' record leading up to that. By the time we get to that, we're probably nearing 1,000 days where Roman Reigns will be champion. And then you have The Rock come in and take down Roman Reigns in the ultimate destruction of a dynasty, where The Rock alone is able to take down the bloodline. I don't know. Maybe. But are you going to just do anything to avoid that match? I mean, do you have The Rock and Roman Reigns without the belts? Sure you could. But this is where Vince McMahon, to his credit, probably had a good way of doing things when it comes to this. There is something to be said about creating sports entertainment and the level, the epic type of matches, the epic type of feel that we had of certain matches, even if they were booked badly all the way up. We can't deny the fact that with WrestleManias every year, or SummerSlams for that matter, you always had a booking where things got really epic no matter what. And the level and star power that certain stars have, it's not tested here by Triple H, because there is not one of his stars yet that have gotten to the point where that I think the NXT experience from ground up really made them into, on the men's side, I'm going to say. I don't know how much influence Triple H had towards all of the horsewomen in general, the ones that we really put so much esteem for. We talk about Sasha, Bayley, Charlotte, Becky. I put Paige in that. And I'll just say, or Alexa, I'll put in there too as well. I don't know how much was him and how much influence he had on that. I think he had quite a bit by that point. But then after that, I mean, sure, the Wyatts, the Shield, you could take all of that and probably give a lot of credit to Triple H for the booking on that. You could. But much like anything else, what about this current crop of stars? I mean, sure, there's some things where you had certain stars that have not been able to reach that level of star power that they could have. Because we know as well, Triple H might have done a lot in NXT to get these stars ready for the main roster, and the appeal and the viability of these stars, the value, what they were going to become in the future was undeniable. So seeing Roman as he is now, stop and start, no matter what, Vince did make a star out of him. And Vince gets the credit for Roman Reigns. And the transition out of, for Sasha, for Bayley, for Charlotte, for Alexa, for Becky, that actually all goes to Vince. I mean, Becky is put as the man. The Sasha Banks character as a boss was amplified as a result of being on that main roster. Bayley and the heel turn was great. Like, I mean, they really did step her up to another level. Never knew it was going to do that, but it did. It was the right decision ultimately. Alexa had a great run. And then they did decide to go ahead and go a little more out there for that character to attach her to Bray Wyatt, things like that, which didn't help. But now they're trying to bring her back into the right place. Asuka, you could put in there as well. On the women's side, is a different story. The women's side, I actually think it's easier for the women to become stars. It's just something about that. Because the women in this particular trade, there's just such an appeal to them. It's more difficult to book a main event male star, a guy, as a main eventer. I think it's much more difficult. Because there are certain parameters of the certain size, the girth, the strength, the agility, and that we are accustomed to seeing stars that are larger than life, that also are feats of strength, of power, of dominance. And there are certain stars in Triple H's setup that do not have that kind of feel. And it's not like they're not good workers, but the point is that there are things that WWE does that make it stand out. And because now Triple H is more concerned about work rate, more concerned about doing other things to booking that will not be Vince's vision. He's playing into the same playing field that the other wrestling promotions are doing. What AEW has been doing. Which is why I brought up my 5 things that Triple H is doing that's following Tony Khan's playbook. I said that last week. And you know what? Nobody actually gave me any flack for that. I don't know. Nobody said anything otherwise from me when I wrote that. And then this week, I believe his booking could ultimately level the playing field for the other players in the other organizations. And when I talk about that, I'm referring to AEW with Ring of Honor, because I think Ring of Honor, I can't really put a position. As you look on the graphic this week, I put kind of a mountain. And so you see the top of the mountain is WWE. AEW is slightly underneath them. And then on a second plateau, a second level, is Impact Wrestling, MLW, and the NWA. A Ring of Honor, I can't put into that mix right now because I really don't know what to determine what they are. But they're a novelty promotion right now that is looking to be reestablished. So at the moment, I can't inject them into the New Wrestling Alliance, not yet, because there's not a full identity for Ring of Honor yet. I mean, Tony Khan's did a good job of keeping value to that brand, but he hasn't been able to do what he wanted to do yet to get that brand standalone, which eventually he will. Now, what's happening here is you look at the positioning and the way that stars are being built with the ability that they have. That meant they might not have large size wrestlers, or they might have guys that might not have the physiques, and they're good workers and they can cut good promos. Well, then what you're doing is you're kind of taking down the notch where WWE is bringing on stars that would excel in other promotions. But are they really at the WWE level? This is what I'm saying. In the NXT realm, the black and white, the black and gold, all those Ring of Honor stars probably would have been top stars in other promotions. Given the opportunity and Impact, MLW, NWA, Ring of Honor, they probably would have positioned themselves into possible title holders or something else. And with some of those organizations, the women were not that prominent. That's a different story now. Impact was the place for work rate for women. Before, when the Divas were not around yet, the Knockouts were the first division to really do that. And so my respect for the Knockouts division is always good. And I still think that the Impact Knockouts division does a damn good job and are probably, I think they're in the same conversation as to if you had to pick which women's division is working better and has a better roster, Impact's in the conversation. I don't think you can say that Impact is not. I think they are. And so with that said, I like where they're going with things now. With Impact, MLW, NWA, they're all trying to institute women's divisions. NWA has their women's division is being built up. They have some good stars there, but I mean, let me tell you, Kamille, the Brick House, in any promotion would be a star. She is. I mean, for what NWA has, they might not have amazing depth in the mid card. They have some good depth. They have some good stars to enjoy. Like, I enjoy them, but I know they're not at a certain level. But NWA has been known to create diamonds in the rough. And they have. And they've given some chances to some stars that have catapulted back up the ranks to other companies. MLW is finding diamonds, and they are making stars. Like, they still, people are talking about Jacob Fatu. We can still talk about Alexander Hammerstone. We can still talk about Richard Holiday. I mean, you've seen Valkyrie winning the women's featherweight title, and now look at her. She was back competing in Impact Wrestling again. She's back in the limelight after being let go from WWE, and she's thriving. She's back in Mexico. She's been Impact. She's working NWA now this week, coming up at NWA 74. She'll take on Kamille for the Burke. Tell you, that's a hell of a match. It's great. And it's one of those stars that, okay, they weren't going to do right with Taya Valkyrie somewhere else, so she's not here. That's okay. But then I look and say, okay, Triple H is letting those kind of stars. I mean, that's why there's the open door of saying, well, with the fans, yeah, look, we're getting some stars that were glorified in NXT. Now, I'm not saying they're not good, but there was a thing where Vince and the cut that he would make, like, you know, in golf, there's making the cut. Like, if you're trying to get into the major leagues from the minor leagues, you had to make the cut. You had to qualify yourself to be called up. That's why they always talk about calling up from the minor leagues to the major leagues. You're talking about making the cut of a roster. Like right now, the NFL is having training camp. If you want to be one of those players that makes the 53-man roster, you got to make the cut. Meanwhile, there's a lot of players we might see in preseason or in minor leagues or developmental, like in the G League and the NBA. Sure, there's some great talent there, but are they going to be superstars on a global level? Otherwise, if you're trying to put them up there, the machine's not going to create them. This is what I think the disconnect that some of my fellow podcast wrestling brethren have. That they think the WWE machine is going to make Ricochet or Gunther or Karrion Kross. Just because the machine is there, that's instantly going to make them a star. No, they need that extra unguent, that extra little bit of touch. Vince, ultimately, whether you like it or you don't like it, was the one. Because he did have a touch of having of making stars. He still had that. The problem is that he was way too embedded in the process. When he had a Vince Russo, or if he had someone else doing the creative, and he was not so embedded into it and so involved, like honestly, when he was more being able to be a character, I think when he was being a character, he wasn't so, I mean, of course he'd have the deal with the rundown on the script because he had to be a part of it. But when he was behind the scenes completely, all those times he would rip up the scripts, I mean, that hurt ultimately. And he had been off TV for a long time, very rarely being on TV and not being involved in anything. And so for me, there's something to be said about, I mean, put it like this. Theory, as a star, sure, they put him in this week in the main event. But I'll tell you something. I mean, maybe would Austin Theory have been that big a deal if you normally would have had him run through their normal run, right? Let me ask you, like, put it like this. If Triple H would have done his normal run, where he had everything going on with the deal with Theory, and Vince never did those vignettes with him, and Roman Reigns doesn't get to drop that nugget of a promo saying Daddy's not here to help you anymore. Like, those kind of things there made a big difference. And so without that, you kind of lose your spot. You're like, what are you going to do next? I mean, Theory, I don't think would be still relevant now and would be getting the kind of pop or the kind of booing, the kind of response that he gets now as he goes out. Okay. They did decide to put the Money in the Bank briefcase on him. He is a smaller guy, but he's larger than life because Vince made it that way. They made him the chosen one. Something to be said about that. Theory, in essence, yeah, he was a chosen guy, but because Vince chose him, Triple H is actually trying to keep him relevant because the guy was being booked for main event and he was doing a pretty good job of it. Let's be honest. He was a nice little wrinkle into the Roman Reigns Brock Lesnar match going into SummerSlam. He actually added something different to that match that we've seen a billion times. Put it to you like this. Theory's match was at the end of the night, right? With Dolph Ziggler. I'll tell you what. There was not a major drop off on the Raw ratings. 1.97 million viewers at 8 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, it got over 2 million viewers. And it stayed to 1.88 million viewers at 10. By the way, Better Call Saul was on at 9 o'clock. And even with Better Call Saul's series finale, you know, the show that's the precursor to Breaking Bad, the average for the season finale was 1.8 million viewers. Up by 400,000 viewers for that show. And when people were all into it, it was an event. And on that event for that show, panning out after 5 seasons, here we go. So we after 6 seasons, and Raw stayed strong. Now, that is a testament. And that's something that's got to be said. When Monday Night Football comes in, can they continue to do that? Like, they didn't grow a major number here, but the number was good. In the demo, 18 to 49 years old, they drew first for the night on cable and beat Better Call Saul head to head. So that's good. But you also got to look at what they had in the matches that night as well. Theory and Dolph Ziggler closing out the night. Theory was given that prominent spot with Dolph Ziggler in a work rate match to where Theory closes out the main event. And they held on to the audience. It was not a major drop-off in what sense. So Theory could be considered a young pillar, like we talk about AEW with Orange Cassidy or Darby Allin or Jungle Boy or MJF. He's a pillar on that brand. That's not a pillar that Triple H created. He didn't really do much with him anyway because he wasn't down on the NXT roster for long. Vince put him into the gimmick with the Monday Night Messiah. And they were trying to push him. And remember, we had that whole thing where there was that controversy with him, some stuff that was going on with him that he got scot-free from and still made it through and was kept on that main roster, brought back to that main roster again with a retweet gimmick with the selfie stuff, A-Town Down. And here we go. The character still is still kept strong. That's a Vince character. Vince made, Vince approved. Something that Vince does was able to elevate that star. The things that they did with Drew McIntyre when they brought him back. Listen, with all due respect, Drew's promo, talking about he was once called the Chosen One 15 years ago, fired, worked his ass off to come back, which he did as Drew Galloway, worked through Impact Wrestling, worked through all the other promotions that he did to get himself back. And then they said, because of his work rate being so good at Impact Wrestling. They called him to come back. And when they did, he busted his ass. Whatever he was given from 3-man band, by the way. Remember 3MB? Jinder Mahal, Heath Slater. And remember all that was going on with that. Amazing. 3-man band. That tells you how far back things go. And Drew McIntyre has definitely pulled himself away from all that. And then we get to here, and Drew McIntyre, he's a main eventer as a result of Vince's booking. Because in the booking under Vince, they did book him to take out Brock Lesnar in the Royal Rumble. He listed the opponents. He beat Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, Goldberg. Now Roman's in his path into Clash at the Castle, which was in the books before Triple H assumed the creative power. I'm just reminding you all of that. Just keep that in mind. That's a star that was already made. Bobby Lashley, another example. Sure, they did some things with him. Paul Heyman tried to do things with him with the wedding angle, right? But Bobby Lashley, you did get the Hurt Business. That was booked very well. People enjoyed that in the Thunderdome. And during the Thunderdome, they took time. They built him up. They kept him strong. And for all the credit, Bobby Lashley is a top star. And they put him in a great match with AJ Styles. And to go ahead and reheat AJ Styles and bring him back to prominence was great. Strong. But Bobby Lashley's a big star now. He's still a main eventer. In my eyes, he still is. And they kept him around that main event. That's a testament to Vince. The booking's never perfect. That was the one thing, is that how they got these stars there sucked. This is the extra part that Triple H needs to understand, is that, well, I mean, I'm sure he understands, but you just can't come in and conventionally book a star and say, okay, keep him winning all the way to get to be that's the dominant player to go after a title. You have to do something more with them. The promos have to be on point. Sure, you're not going to get them scripted anymore, but do you think all these stars that are going to get a chance to be have a little more freedom in their right and what they're going to say and their talking points, are they going to get the point across and really sell it? That's the question you got to ask. I mean, Kerry and Cross, listen, I like him. Him and Scarlett, what a great pair. But Kerry and Cross, I always say the same thing. Remember, I've said this many times before. It's like a larger-than-life comic book character. A person that's going to be such a strong character that you might see them in a movie. Like they'll be called by Hollywood in the next couple of years. Kerry and Cross is one example. You give them backstage segments and you give them some chance to go ahead and, put some words together and go TikTok. Yeah, that's great. That's prominent. But for him, he also has to have the chance to finally go ahead and not just have the matches out there. He's got to have those promos in front of that crowd so they can record them and they can do it together and do whatever they want with feuds. You got to put him in proper feuds, and you got to be able to get him to where he can talk and really win that crowd over. And really win them over so much that it spawns globally. Like a global audience will just embrace this character. Hate him or love him. Some way they will connect. That audience needs to be satiated. AEW doesn't have that global audience. Neither does MLW, NWA, not to the level of WWE. That machine might give them the exposure they have, and that might be good for them to go somewhere else. But when you get these stars that Triple H is going to try to bring back or they're going to put out there, they got to be able to step to the other level. Listen, it's nice to have Bayley come out there with Io Sky and Dakota Kai. And Dakota Kai, yeah, I could see the appeal and I could see where there's an upside to her making it to this main roster. She spent more than enough time down in NXT. Well, I get that. And they've developed this character quite a bit. Is she going to be able to stand out and pan out to such a high extent to be able to show that she's worth making the cut? She's cut from the same cloth that Sasha Banks or Bailey or Becky Lynch, were they getting looked at by Hollywood, right? Or are you going to look at and say, look at the star, look at the appeal that these stars have. That look at the tens of thousands that are all into it. Bianca Belair, same thing. You got to ask yourself, are they going to be able to get themselves to that? I don't know that yet, but I'd like to see what happens. These are the things I think about all the time, which is what concerns me on the booking. The larger than life part has to happen. He's got to find out what Vince had, what Vince was able to do to make Hulk Hogan a star, to make Undertaker, Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mankind, to elevate CM Punk to the status that he is such a legend in AEW. Bryan Danielson, the stars that AEW now have, there's quite a bit you can give some credit to Vince. Because you saw glimpses of something spectacular in some of these stars until they got screwed up creatively. Miro's a great example. Malachi Black, another great example. Andrade, yet another great example. Adam Cole, another great example. And Bryan Danielson also in that same vein. But Daniel Bryan was such a bigger star because of WWE, okay? Listen, you can't tell me anything about, American Dragon and all that he's doing. He learned how to cut great promos in WWE. He learned that. The yes chance he gets all the time, it's like Ric Flair. Those yes chants will follow Bryan Danielson forever. That's WWE. And now, granted, the audience, the fans in that fan base created that. But there was such a strong response that Vince, you know what? He realized he was wrong. He realized he was wrong. And Bryan Danielson did get the praise he was supposed to get, and he was such a big star. He could have still been a big star in WWE right now. And Triple H, I'm sure, would love to have that man back in the company. And then you look at, I mean, that's just what I see. There's no doubt that solidifying where things are and where Triple H is able to do a better job than maybe what Paul Heyman or Eric Bischoff or anybody else would have done, like shoring up the mid-card and making the TV product better. Yes, he's doing that absolutely. He's succeeding in that. The numbers are showing. The next test will be is how resilient are those ratings in 3 weeks when Monday Night Football comes back. After Clash of the Castle, the fall for the Clash of the Castle, that Monday, Labor Day, that's going to be a tough break for them. How will those numbers go after what happens at that show? And then going forward. Because football is going to consume that spot. The Manning cast, Monday Night Football and ESPN has gotten better. They're going to pull an audience. Are people going to sway away to watch football? And are they going to take that break like they normally do? Will the ratings suffer? And then on top of that, they got to make sure the SmackDown also keeps himself in a certain spot because new programming will come back. Fridays will have new programming again. And then they'll have to worry about other things going on like the NBA and college football coming into play that will also take a little bit of a dent on the ratings on SmackDown. So the resiliency, shoring things up now is good, but this is the dead summer months. This is when things are supposed to be better. This is what we always ask about after the off season of SummerSlam. This is where we always hoped for years, for over almost a decade doing the show, that I always hoped that WWE would actually get some stars built up and would do some things to get things ready for next year and keep the momentum going. And not just start losing the crowd for half a year, only to try to gin them back up at the start of next year for the Rumble. So Triple H is working on that right now. But he has to be able to build star power. That's one thing to go ahead and gin up the star power you already have. by getting Kevin Owens, Bobby Lashley, Drew McIntyre, AJ Styles, and getting some of your other stars and getting them back into prominent roles. Seth Rollins. Listen, Riddle, when he comes back and gets to wrestle again and he takes on Seth Rollins, credit where credit's due, that is a creation of Vince. Sure, Matt Riddle might have become a darling with a following in NXT, but what they've done with Riddle, somehow, some way, the goofiness of the character, the flip-flops, the scooter worked, the giraffes flying around and all that stuff, it worked. Riddle is such a babyface now. It's incredible. And he was such a goof at the beginning, but it worked. And now this guy is so prominent. Triple H has been given a gift. So you got a number of stars right there. But then all these people he wants to bring back from NXT, or some of these people that were called, that were future endeavor that he's bringing back. You're going to invest in them. Sure, that's fine. But you can't invest in them just to be good players in the mid card. You need some of these stars to become main eventers. Do you expect that from Tommaso Ciampa? Do you expect Johnny Gargano to come back and ultimately do that? The people that are going to be able to do that will be if a Bray Wyatt comes back. When Cody Rhodes is back from injury. When you let Riddle, Seth Rollins, Bobby Lashley, Drew McIntyre succeed and ultimately soar with good freedom. Kevin Owens, you let them soar to new heights. Gunther, if you think you can pull it off, let's go. Let's go. I want to see it. But he has to remember the stars have been made, what Vince was able to do to make them such a big star. The machine does not make them. You make them with that machine, that marketing machine. Nick Khan is going to pressure you to make sure you make stars like Vince did. You might not like the way he did it, but he did. This is what I'm trying to get across to all of you. And I hope you understand where I'm coming from. Let me take some expert commentary out there that's being said. Now, Triple H himself, let's talk about the booking he has. How about booking on the show now? And on the quarterly sales call, he talked about that. He says, quote, the following in this transcript. The plans for the promotions, plans for storylines, and finding future wrestling stars. I'm going to read this whole thing. He says, I've had the good fortune to work in this business for over more than 30 years, whether on screen, at the office in the writer's room, at the performance center, and many of those at the same time. Whenever the opportunity was available, I always took it. Always wanted to learn behind the scenes, the why we did what we did. So I can apply those learnings and become the best talent I can possibly be. In my new role, it comes with a great responsibility, but I'm incredibly confident that we have the right team in place to succeed. Part of that mission is orchestrating storylines and creative that appeal to our existing fans, growing the WWE universe along the way. It's early days, but we believe that you see some initial signs of this positive momentum. We want to create to continue moments and memories that will last a lifetime, and we will get there by writing compelling storylines for the most intriguing characters. And then on top of that, developing new talent. Talent is an area where this company has a renewed focus. This is something I like that he said, because everybody thinks he's going to go back and just go to the indies to pull out talent. No, he needs to keep committed to this next in line program. He talks about the program identifying the next generation of superstars from collegiate athletics, signing over 30 Division I athletes, All-Americans, national champions, even gold medalists, Olympic gold medalists. And they've taken steps to make the talent development pathway more robust in an effort to attract a younger and more diverse group of athletes at scale. And when they talked about signing 50 new developmental talent, the average age of that talent was 23 years old. So by the time they get them on to NXT or onto the main roster, they'll be in their late 20s and hitting their prime, hitting their stride, and probably fully seasoned and ready to go forward. Now, he also praises WrestleMania and the ticket sales, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Well, I'll say this. Over 90,000 tickets were sold within the first 24 hours, more than any event in history. 42% increase over first day sales for WrestleMania 38. And they're at 80% capacity for an event that's still 8 months away. And we've yet to announce a single match taking place on either night. And then someone asks, as head of creative, what opportunities do you see to refresh and improve the product? And what changes should fans and investors look for as your product evolves over the coming months? And this is what he said. Quote, I think the opportunity in front of us is massive. And as a great man once told me, first day on the job thinking, and that's what we're doing here is first day on the job thinking for me. I'm approaching it from a first day, what is working, what isn't working, from the overall picture all the way down to the smallest of details, really trying to create from there. It all comes down to the same thing that it's come down to since the beginning, creating iconic characters, putting them in amazing storylines and fantastical storylines. And whatever works for those characters the best, and then running with it and watching how fans react to that along the way. It's the right words to say. That doesn't sway too far from what Vince McMahon would say, or what Stephanie would say. He says, I think the opportunity is massive. I think the opportunity for us to not only engage with the stars that we have across for our fans, but to create new stars as well and create the platform and the opportunity for them to be bigger than anything we've seen prior to it. Okay. Those words are strong. That's the right mindset to go in. That's the execution of this plan. That those words are important. Creating icons. Amazing storylines, fantastical storylines. So yeah, building compelling, important, come back to every week storylines. And creating the platform and opportunity to make them bigger than anything we've ever seen. Which I would actually rephrase, make them bigger than they've ever been in their lives. This is important. And one of the things that as the Sportster and Andrew Kelly actually wrote is that he says that Triple H has been relying on cliffhangers. And part of the appeal of the Attitude Era in other places in the WWE was the fact that they had unpredictability and storylines to help make it so popular. Several twists and turns along the way. Attitude Era always had us sing a lot of shocking moments and surprises. Many would close out episodes of weekly television. Then talking about putting huge angles at the end of a show will have the audience remember that moment more clearly when going away, but they're more likely to watch the two in the week after to see what will happen next. Then he mentions how Vince's booking was boring and predictable. And some of the things he's done so far, the post-SummerSlam Raw ending with Edge inadvertently spearing Dominic Mysterio, SmackDown following up with the shocking return of Karrion Kross, laying out Drew McIntyre and staring down Roman Reigns, things like that. Dexter Lumis being arrested at ringside after the show and as the show is going off the air. They're talking about here that they might not be the biggest cliffhangers in the world, but fans have enjoyed these returns and moments. Even just the slightest bit of intrigue can do wonders for keeping fans invested in storylines, giving at least one reason to tune in the following week in order to see what happens next. Let me tell you, another thing I got to tell you too. You know, NXT Heatwave had one of their best ports of the mat. They actually had one of their best rated shows. What did I see? 739,000? They broke 700,000, which they hadn't done in a long time. Something to be said about that. Look at what they did in terms of what they put on the roster. In the night, Braun Breaker against JC McDonough as your main event. Cora Jade and Roxanne Perez being set up in here as well. Mandy Rose defeating Zoe Stark for the NXT Women's title. Carmelo Hayes over Giovanni Vinci for the NXT North America title. Listen, these are all stars that are getting built up from the NXT 2.0. This was not the NXT Black and Gold stars, except for Santos Escobar. But you had 5 matches in here, and these were more than enough, with a little bit of the NXT UK evasion with Gallus and Tyler Bate coming in, that it was enough for people to say, wow. People were watching Tuesday night. People were tuned in. Those are new fans. And some fans looking back in, even though Triple H really doesn't have that much say in that product. Maybe it's Shawn Michaels, I don't know. But like I said, you close out the night with Mandy Rose and Braun Breaker as your top stars in NXT. And they generated some ratings. Uh-oh. And that's amazing. NXT pulling some great numbers. The numbers have not been that bad. I just need to go look at Gerwig real quick and see what the numbers are, but they're not doing that bad on the NXT side. Not at the moment. I mean, NXT was still pulling some rough numbers anyway, staying around the 600,000 mark. I mean, going in from July 25th, week of August 1st, week of August 8th, they were pulling pretty decent numbers, staying around 600,000. I remember going back to October, the numbers did take where there was interest in the initial part, but you go to the start of the year, after WrestleMania, there was a dip, but like really not that much of a dip that you would think. Like they had a couple of weeks where they were under 600,000 in May. And then into June, they pulled over 600,000. And then a couple of weeks at the end of June into the July 4th week where they dropped. But then back around over that 600,000 hump, which is good for them. And pulling a big audience for Heatwave. Something there. That's pretty good for them. I really think that's not that bad. And so overall, can't say much bad about when it comes to SmackDown or Raw. I mean, listen, their numbers are doing really well. The turnaround feels pretty good. I got to appreciate that. But there's a lot more to do. Just to keep everything solid and strong for the TV product to be consistent, that's taking care of your base. And by the way, there's not much of your base left that was swayed away that's going to come back. All right? That's part of the thing that we have to worry about. Now, former SmackDown head writer Brian Gewirtz, right? He has been making the runs right now because he put out a new book. His book is called There's Just One Problem. Just hit shelves this week. And he talked about some of the he was a former head writer, by the way. Talking about some of the biggest storylines in the 2000s, early 2010s. He goes through a very few things in here. And one of the things that stood out was the fact that Triple H has an obstacle to overcome, now taking over. He's excited about the changes that are being made since he took over, but he's worried about one thing. He spoke with the Ariel Helwani show and said that Triple H's new WWE has that fresh car smell. New and exciting, and that, quote, from just the creative writer mindset, this is going to be really, really interesting now. His connection, Triple H's connection and love for NXT is great for the brand, as the former writers who were trying to write for those characters didn't know the product very well. He's accentuating the strengths of the brand because he's been intimately familiar with it. Yes. But one thing he says Triple H has to be cautious of is trying to maintain the momentum. Anything new is going to come with some positives, and a fair share of fans will be excited about the changes. But as time goes by, that's going to fade. What does he do with the brand over the long term that really matters? And so he talks about, can he sustain it? So he's had surprises. Seen debuts of Dexter Lumis, Karrion Kross, Hit Row, and others, but not every week will include a surprise. What happens when that way of booking runs out? Quote, we're seeing a different style, a different way of storytelling. The key is to sustain it. So he makes a good point. I don't know. You tell me how it's going to work out. And so, like I said, NXT 2.0 pulled out best numbers. What was the exact number here? Let me pull this up real quick. 723,000. Highest viewership since October 2021. So one of the best numbers they had since they brought the show on as 2.0. And the numbers were up on every demographic, by the way. Pretty good. I'll give him some credit there. Meanwhile, what Vince left behind, even though he's going down in a blaze of glory, the company overall is doing very good. Their outlook has been raised. They launched their new inaugural NFT sale on Moonsault, the company's official NFT marketplace. Announced the new next-in-line class of 15 college athletes. A new enhanced digital platform for e-commerce and licensed merchandise in connection with their long-term partnership with Fanatics, which is a great move for them. Revenue was up. Operating income was up. The adjusted EBITDA was up 34%. Net income was $49 million for the quarter. They're doing great. They are not hurting at all. Of course, WrestleMania didn't hurt at all either. Now, one other person also made comments about Vince leaving, which is where I need to transition next because more news on Vince has come out. I'll just glom over that a little bit. Jericho praises Vince McMahon and looks how his departure will affect the WWE. So he spoke on this. He spoke on the Swerve City podcast and talked about it. And wanted to make the point was he says that, quote, the pros of Vince leaving WWE will be seen very quickly as we see a lot of changes right off the bat that are very refreshing and things like that. Lots of in-ring time. I think the cons, no pun intended, of Vince leaving won't be felt for a few months, maybe more, 6 months, a year, because there's a lot of things that Vince did, just little things. Vince is a once-in-a-generational genius. He also says, from what I learned about the business from him and Pat Patterson, which I think is another genius, and I think Vince learned that from Pat too. And you know, learning in that era is something that will end up hurting in the long run. It would be great if Vince was still able to be there to consult, but I don't think Vince is going to consult anything. And Jericho's right. Even Jericho sees, without Vince somewhat embedded or involved, he never always said, we didn't need him to be pulled out of creative altogether. He needed to be oversight, which is the best place for him. He needed to be there for the big decisions, the big booking decisions, but not taken out altogether, which is what I always said for a long time. Vince still needed to have that extra part that makes him important as to what he is and how important he is to the business. Because I believe, much like Chris Jericho says, wait 6 months, a year down the line. Because now you're not creating sports entertainment anymore. You're in the same business as AEW, Ring of Honor, NWA, Major League Wrestling, and Impact Wrestling. You're creating the same kind of content. And WWE is supposed to be able to reach out to the bigger audience. They're supposed to be able to go ahead and bring the audiences that will then trickle down to shows like Impact Wrestling and MLW and NWA and AEW for that matter. Which is why we said wrestling is going to be as big as it is because of what WWE does. It's important and dependent upon them, on being able to be the top dog that they are and continue to thrive as such, which is that they need to not be discouraged or dissuaded from what made them big, what made them huge. They need to not pull themselves away from what made that company successful in the 40 years that Vince was at the helm. They need to respect. They need to reflect. They need to revisit. And they need to take all of that and reflect on the fact that they need to realize there was a lot of things Vince did right in the long run. For all the things we didn't like towards the end of his run, there are still a lot of things that we have to give credit to Vince McMahon for. Now, what we can't give him credit for is the way he decided to go ahead and go down quick. It's a shame. So, Wall Street Journal put out a news story. Now that Vince has stepped down, the latest story from Wall Street Journal. From the same two guys that have been part of this whole story since from the get-go, since May. Well, this is their victory run. This is their victory lap. They got them. They report that the investigation by the board of directors into allegations of sexual misconduct is substantially complete, according to a securities filing on Monday. The internal investigation announced in June found roughly $20 million in expenses that should have been recorded in the company. One of the things they already talked about was $5 million that was not counted towards correctly went to charities held by Donald Trump, the Trump Organization. And that was following his appearances on Monday Night Raw, leading up to the WrestleMania match with Bobby Lashley and the hair versus hair match with McMahon and Trump. Attorney representing Mr. McMahon, most likely Mr. McDevitt, Jerry McDevitt, has declined to comment still. The company said all the payments were or are being paid by Mr. McMahon personally, but still should have been recorded as company expenses. Remember, what happened was it wasn't so much all the allegations that came into light. What ultimately made Mr. McMahon step down and fully resign his post was when the Securities and Exchange Commission and federal prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York launched their own inquiries into the payments. Once those authorities got involved, that was enough for McMahon to step down and just steer clear to not hurt the company financially and hurt the shareholders. So out of respect to them, he stepped down. But as far as I'm concerned, nothing has been said yet to look at what happened here and what he actually did. He's not been accused of a crime yet. But if they wanted to make sure they were going to drop him off and he was not going to be any more of a factor, these Wall Street Journal writers did what they wanted to do. They succeeded. Good for you. You took him down. But have we heard anything about the allegations in terms of who was paid off and what he did? No. Are we ever going to find out? No. We're just going to know that he got stepped down for something sleazy. That's it. But in the court of public opinion, you're still not going to have anything out there. The journalists decided to put the hit pieces out there. They succeeded because it's the name Wall Street Journal, and that's it. So they got what they wanted. And so anonymous emails, anonymous sources, they did enough to stir the pot, stir up the hornet's nest to get other people to engage. Internal investigation wasn't enough. No, let's get the SEC, let's get the state attorney's office, or the U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of New York. Let's take them down like the mob. Get them on some RICO shit. So they did that to him. Okay. But we're never going to know what he actually did. Like, I really can't be satisfied with the fact that Vince McMahon goes down without really knowing what the hell he did. Like, actually getting the evidence. Okay, if I was in the jury, what am I indicting this guy for? I mean, okay, the payments. Show me what the payments were for. If I'm in the jury and I need to indict this man and he needs to go to jail or something needs to happen to be punished civilly, then what the hell did he do? Show me what he exactly did. The journalist here could not do that. Could not hold in a court of law. But they did what they did. That's what they wanted to do. This is their choice. This is what they chose to do. Good for you. Okay, whatever. So we got so much wrestling coming up in the next 3 weeks. Getting into Labor Day, you have NWA 74 next Saturday and Sunday, and I will do post shows. Maybe I'll do post shows for both nights. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll figure it out once we get there. Well, there's going to be too many matches to cover, so I guess I will do 2 nights of NWA. I'll be one of the few people that does, because of course I like to do these things. So I will do a post show for NWA 74. You got a pre-show match with the Country Gentlemen. That's what, AJ Kazana, Anthony Andrews against the Gold Rush. And that's the team of Marche Rocket and Jordan Clearwater. You got a tables match with Bully Ray against Mike Knox, a part of the Cardona family. Taya Valkyrie going up against the Women's World Champion Kamille for the NWA Women's World title, the Burke. Homicide versus Kerry and Morton defending the World Junior Heavyweight Championship, the Burke Invitational, so that after Kamille either retains or drops the belt to Taya Valkyrie, the winner of that match will take on either these competitors of the Burke Invitational: Tootie, Lynn, KiLynn, Samantha, Starr, Missa, Kate, Madi, Angelina, Love, Jennacide, and Natalia, Markova. At this point, I think Natalia Markova is going to be the inside favorite, or KiLynn, whichever one. Mark Cardona will take on a handpicked opponent. I guess that'll be a Billy Corgan decision. Beelzebub's Bedlam match with the Miserably Faithful of the team of Judas, Gags, the Gimp, and Sal the Pal, taking on the Ill Begotten. Alex Taylor, Jeremiah Plunkett, and Brush Freeman. EC3 versus Mims. The World Tag Team titles will have the Commonwealth Connection, Harry Smith and Doug Williams, defending against La Rebellion, Bestia, Cesa, Mecha Wolf in a rematch. Luke Hawks versus VSK. Pope versus Rodney Mack. And the night 2, you got Trevor Murdoch taking on Tires for the NWA World's Heavyweight title, the 10 pounds of gold. And then the NWA Women's World title between the winner of Kamille and Taya Valkyrie versus the Burke Invitational winner. A 10-man battle royal for the U.S. Tag Team titles to resurrect the U.S. Tag Team titles. Gold Rush, Miserably Faithful, The Now with Giselle Collins and Vic Delicious, Ill Begotten, The Fixers, Wrecking Ball, Legursky and Jay Bradley, Country Gentlemen, Hawks Airy, Luke and PJ Hawks, Team Ambition, Mike Outlaw and Camaro Jackson will all be in that fight. A street fight for the women's tag team titles with Pretty Empowered versus the Hex in a rematch. The National Openweight Championship for the MLW's National Openweight Championship in a featured match. Davey Richards will take on Billy Salas, accompanied by Pollo Del Mar. Tom Ladder versus Judas. Colby Carino versus Caprice Coleman. There you go. All Out, you got coming up. We'll talk about All Out and Clash the Castle next week. I do want to make a couple of points about this week where we had Impact Wrestling's Emergence, which was quite a show. If you did not get a chance to watch it, we did get new tag team champions in the Vexed. By the way, I said it was VXT. Vexed is actually what the name was of Deanna Purrazzo and Chelsea Green. They beat Rosemary and Taya Valkyrie. Brian Myers beat Bhupinder Gujjar for the Impact Digital Media Championship. And also Trey McGill and Laredo Kid took over Decay, Crazy Steve and Black Taurus. But then let me tell you, you had 12 minutes from Mike Bailey and Jack Evans. That was a hell of a match. Mike Bailey just continues, the speedball continues to impress. And they give him a lot of time on Impact Wrestling. A lot of time. Which is good. Because he's getting, I do believe he's getting over. He doesn't have much promo ability, but the guy can work. So I can see where that guy is going to get looked at by Japanese companies, Mexican companies, whatever. People are going to be watching that guy because that guy's got a hell of a work rate. Vaughn by Design defeating Chris Sabin and Kushida, whereby Alex Shelley would normally team with the Time Splitters with Kushida, except for this point you have Chris Sabin. That's a hell of a match. Bandito and Ray Horace AAA featured match, which was just dynamite. What a hell of a match those two went through. Steve Macklin and Sami Callihan. First of all, you started the match off with them, and then it continued and spread around the arena where we didn't even get the start of the match until later in the night. Because I think the match was like the second match of the night, and then they just started brawling outside of the ring, and then they brought it back in, had the match, and Sami Callihan won. And Macklin took a beating, man. Let me tell you what. Honor No More wins the no DQ 10-man tag team match. So now, Taven and Bennett get now a shot at the Impact World Tag Team titles against who? Gallows and Anderson, right? Of the Bullet Club. Jordan Grace defeats Mia Yim. By the way, Mia Yim, very underrated. She got re-signed with Impact Wrestling, and she looks great right now. Something about where she left and all things that happened in WWE with her and NXT with Retribution and what they did with her in NXT doesn't have anything where it comes to now. They did do the HBIC gimmick that more or less initiated in NXT and was brought over here. which did help to elevate Mia Yip now. Like, now she is so much in her prime. She is so good right now. Like, really does great work. So Mia Yim here in a great role. I like her right here. And I wouldn't have been surprised if she won the Knockouts title, but Jordynne Grace is still continuing to be booked strong. And let me tell you, 27 minutes for Josh Alexander, Alex Shelley. This was a barn burner. What a hell of a match. Alex Shelley, you know, something's got to be said about how good the promo was in the contract signing before this. Josh Alexander, they did a really quick storyline to make the point of, because Alex Shelley had to win the match, the gauntlet or whatever it was, to win the shot against Josh Alexander for Emergence. And then they had the contract signing and put enough of a compelling storyline where Josh Alexander made the point that 20 years ago, one of his first wrestling shows he went to, he saw Alex Shelley on it and inspired him to go train to be a wrestler the next day. Alex Shelley coming back and talking about how big of a star he is, that when he signed the contract, there's your autograph, kid. Like, pretty simple storyline, but worked really well. And Alex Shelley, man, I never give this guy enough credit. But when that guy gets the right opportunity, that guy can work. I'm not so big into his character. Like, even going back to when he was, he had the tripod and the camera and all that stuff. I was never, the video camera. Remember when he was doing that stuff? And then Kevin Nash took a spot with him. I've always liked him with the machine guns with Chris Sabin. As a solo star, not always. I've never been that big or high. I just look at Alex Shelley as a good worker. To me, he kind of reminds me of Kyle O'Reilly. Very much in that sense. Where like, and for whatever reason, Chris Sabin was the one that was deemed, let's make him world champion. Let's give him option C. Okay. Which worked, which was nice for him. And Chris Sabin had a pretty good run with it. I'll give him that. Like, it was kind of like that. What a horrible example, but George Michael, Andrew Ridgely kind of feel to it. Or the Shawn Michaels, Marty Jannetty kind of feel. Alex Shelley gave me a Jannetty vibe. And Chris Sabin, for whatever reason, became the Shawn Michaels. I don't know why. But Alex Shelley did really stand out here. And, to be so far into his career, this match should be talked about, and you should absolutely go ahead and look this up. This match was really worth watching. They had a hell of a pay-per-view. And even after this, there was some after-match comments by Josh Alexander, really just praising Impact Wrestling. They're putting in quality content. They're not cringing at all. They're doing a lot of good shit right. That's a consistently solid show. But that's what Raw and SmackDown are now. That's what AEW Dynamite consistently is. What Rampage is. Which is going back to my original point. That WWE, for what it's worth, needs to make sure that the focus is on iconic characters, on these larger-than-life storylines. WWE under Triple H must continue to act like the WWE that Vince created. So you're going to have to sprinkle some sports entertainment into your wrestling. That's just how it works. Okay? In the heydays of the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression Era that we all will praise, okay, for every Stone Cold of The Rock or John Cena or Randy Orton, you had the Eddie Guerreros, Chris Benoit's, Rey Mysterio's, Kurt Angle's of the world also working. You got to have the best of both worlds. I'm going to leave it there. So next week, I will go ahead and most likely do a couple of nights of commentary. I'll do post shows for NWA 74. I'm looking forward to that. I'm really enjoy Power and NWA USA. It's good stuff. So to get to see this stuff live is a treat. And then in 2 weeks, we get a major Labor Day weekend. And we'll get time to talk about that with Clash at the Castle and All Out. Everything that comes with it. So much going on. And that's how I'm going to leave it right there. And I'm just waiting for MLW to come back. I know they got to wait a little while because they had some changes in their lineup and decided to make a TV taping into a house show, and that's it. But hopefully they're going to get themselves back up. I think, what is it? Chicago. Is it Chicago or where are they going back for a show? I forget. That's their next TV taping, and I forget. But they're supposed to be back sometime in October, so we'll wait for that. In the meantime, come back for another Wrestling is Real podcast, because wrestling needs us. Thank you for listening to the Wrestling is Real podcast. You can find all previous episodes at WrestlingIsReal.com or subscribe to the show on all major podcast outlets, including Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Follow the King of Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at King of Podcasts, and search King of Podcasts on YouTube, or type youtube.com/JBRASCO951. This has been a presentation of the King of Podcasts Radio Network.